Content warnings for this video. This is a discussion of a young adult paranormal romance series from about the 2010s. There is not a lot of particularly dark or disturbing content in this book, but there will be mentions of psychiatric care, drugs and medication. There is some abusive relationships, particularly emotional and personal manipulation in romantic relationships, and a brief mention of some pedophilia. For a book series where the main character explodes every 20 years, Fallen is just not quite as engaging as you'd hope it would be. But that exploding thing never stops being funny, and I'm going to open this review with no other context than the fact that the main character explodes, and we'll get there, and there was a movie made about this young adult series during the young adult movie boom. And the movie, not very much worth watching, not very interesting, but gosh, that scene where she explodes is everything I need, and we're gonna play that, and then we're gonna get into this book, but first.
Did you make a wish?
Past lives, destiny.
You want the truth?
She has no memory of him, but he knows it's her.
Luce, no!
Who put the curse on them?
It's the devil himself.
Luce, no. You will die.
Yeah. So, Fallen. Fallen is probably the most quintessential young adult, angel paranormal romance book of the 2010s. And I can speak from that because that is my specialist area. If you are new to this zone, maybe you're here from Save the Pearls or Lightlark, the two that I've really gone well in, I have a very big interest in angels, and so that has manifested in a very big interest in the 2010 paranormal romance angel fiction, that whole subgenre, which includes a couple series that you maybe have seen and some you haven't. I would say that my least favorite I can give you right now is Hush Hush, which I haven't covered yet, but I will. It's just I hate Hush Hush so much that I have not finished the fourth book of the series, but I have read all of Fallen, so I'm here to tell you about that one. And let me just say again, I care about angels and demons, I care about these books, and I care about bad YA, and so Fallen fits all of that criteria, but I'd actually avoided picking up Fallen for a very long time. It's one of the easiest books to find in thrift shops and even libraries. It's still there, and it meets all of my criteria, but I never grabbed it because basically in 2012, I have a very keen memory of being a young teenager. I'm not going to work out my age then. And I picked up Fallen because I was excited by the notion of angels, because I have not changed in that way. And I read 100 pages, and it was just the most boring thing I'd ever read. And I have a feeling that a lot of people have done this exact experience, because Fallen, book one of Fallen, is some of the most boring writing I've ever seen. It is just it's tedious, it's nothing happens, it has all of your stereotypical young adult angel, paranormal romance, all those plot beats that you know and expect, but they're not even fun in any way. It's just this absolute slog. I gave up when I was younger, and so I was not keen to return to it, and I think a lot of other people know exactly what I mean by that. I mean, I got 100 pages in, I think, but the first 100 pages of Fallen is exactly the same as the next 350 pages of Fallen, and it just blends together in this cacophony of just badness. And then, as an adult, I came back to Fallen, and I read it in 2 sittings, because I'm an adult and I can sit down and read books sometimes, and it's still just very frustrating. The supernatural revelation of Fallen takes place literally 77% through the book, and even then, the reader gets almost no answers to any of the supernatural mysteries of the book. There's nothing that happens besides just, school life. And I wouldn't even be able to explain, the lore and the story if not for the movie and having read the other books. Now, despite this introduction complaining about how boring Fallen is a quartet. And the Quartet, like pretty much every young adult book of this time, book 1 is really bad and really boring, and then for some reason it just goes absolutely off the rails. People have seen my other videos know that Halo is the same way, where Halo book 1 is so nothing, but then suddenly in book 2 we go to hell and there's like Nazis and the door bitches, and it just, goes absolutely crazy. By book 3 we have the Avatar and the Silence from Doctor Who are there, off the rails. Sweet Evil is the same way, where it was already kind of ridiculous and it just goes all the way more and more off the rails into insanity by the later books. Fallen is the exact same way. It goes to some extremely unexpected places that you would just never predict. It's so weird, and this is if you can believe it, probably the best of the paranormal 2010s romance bad YA books. I mean, it's not a good series and I'd never recommend it to anybody. I read these things. You shouldn't really read these things unless you really are inspired to. But Fallen actually might be, by the end, the best of them. So, let's just get into this. The premise of Fallen, book 1, is that there is a girl named Luce, which even as a young teen, I hated so much that her name is Luce. That's one of those stereotypical, it's like if you have a demon and you name your demon Damien. It's just one of those, like, it's Luce, because, like Lucifer, even though Lucifer's legitimately in this book series. But anyway, Luce. She goes to a new boarding reform school for, bad kids and misfit kids. She was involved in this incident that she has no memory of, but it resulted in a boy that she was, kind of dating at the time, burning to death. And all her life she's had these hallucinations of shadows. She had them before the boy burned to death. And now she's basically at, a last chance school for, reform kids. At this new school, everyone is somehow just really interested in Luce, because we're reading a young adult book. It's just sort of the broken down, desolate place of 80 students, and everyone is super into Luce. She meets Daniel, who she feels is somehow familiar, but is she doesn't know him at all. And she's just really interested in Daniel, despite the fact he's super rude to her. At the same time, she hangs out with Cam, who is the most popular boy in school, and he's a bad boy, but he treats her only with respect. So we have our very stereotypical setup here. And the actual, premise, though, secretly behind the scenes, which is barely seen in the rest, 400 pages past since all of that setup. She meets some guys, she's at a school. Okay, time for the end of the book. So it turns out that Daniel is a fallen angel who a long time ago fell in love with Luce, a human. However, whenever he comes to love her or kiss her, or it's unclear what triggers it, but whenever they start to get together as a couple, Luce dies in some horrible way, usually supernaturally, exploding or being attacked by evil shadows, and then she's reborn. This happens every 17 years without fail. No matter how much Daniel tries to avoid her or reject her, they just are fated to come into contact with each other and then fated for her to die because they start dating in some way. Meanwhile, most of the other students at the school are also fallen angels. They've all chosen a side, God or Lucifer, but Daniel, who has chosen to love. So Daniel is basically the one wild card, while everyone else is hung on this equal balance of God or the devil. And then there's Daniel and Luce, who are just right in the middle. And all of the fallen angels, though, just kind of hang out with each other. They clash and click, and they're just waiting for Daniel to pick a side so the end of the world can finally happen. But Daniel always ends up choosing Luce and love, which basically traps him and everybody else for eternity on Earth. And yeah, to be clear again, it's not like when I say God and devil are the sides, there are no regular angels. They're all fallen angels, but some of them are reformed fallen angels, and some of them are just still bad guy fallen angels. And Cam obviously is the bad guy fallen angel to Daniel, who is the not good guy fallen angel, but the love fallen angel, to make that clear. So, this cycle of Luce being reincarnated, it turns out this is the first time ever that Luce wasn't baptized, so if she dies, she won't be reincarnated. And also this time, for the first time ever, when she kisses Daniel, she doesn't explode. That's just an extra thing. So with all of that sort of like the premise and stuff, like to cover the plot, this is a little bit of a scattershot summary, but again, book 1, there's not much that happens. It's a bit weird. We have to just kind of get through it, okay? So the book Fallen, it's just so sparse on plot that me like writing a concise premise covered everything. Like I've now said all of the plot points you need to know going forward. Luce has no personality. She doesn't speak very much, and she's just fought over and adored by 2 extremely attractive boys, and everyone else wants to chill with her or bully her. She arrives in school, and this book takes place over like a couple months max. Like a lot of paranormal books of the time, it takes place in a stupidly short period of time. A lot of the times, if you actually pay attention to a young adult book, so many of them take place over like a few weeks where they just sort of meet, fall in love, and everything happens. So Luce is just, she goes to classes, then she skips classes to go hang out with Cam. She hangs with her quirky, nice human friend Pen. She obsesses over Daniel, he's hot. Cyberstalks Daniel, kisses Cam. Daniel and Cam fight. Daniel stops being a jerk but continues to be cold. Daniel and Cam fight. Daniel kisses Luce and she doesn't explode. Daniel explains reincarnation. Daniel and Cam fight, but this time there's locusts. Luce finally pieces things together that Daniel is an angel, and the religion teacher then betrays her and kills her human friend. I'm not gonna get into that part. Daniel then flies Luce away and is like, I gotta go now. Like, he basically, like, saves her, drops her off, and then is like, bye, and then the book ends. Like, it's nothing. And its most notable things of the book, it happens in the last 100 pages, and it's just nothing. It's mostly a contemporary book with absolutely some of the most boring events. But, you know, that's one of the things that really annoyed me with the first book in Fallen. It's like, where are my angels? I came here for the angels. Where are they? Are they here? I'd like to meet them, please. Can you please introduce me to some angels? When I pick up a supernatural book, like, I want supernatural stuff in it, and this book just so doesn't supply angels. They have wings and they fly a bit at the very end. In the movie, by the way, the wings are the only other good thing about the movie because they look quite silly when they fly. And as mentioned, the revelation of the reincarnation thing, and that's the first confirmation of any paranormal element, and it comes page like 350 out of 450. He confirms like he's an angel like page 400 out of 450. It's just so late that it makes Twilight's scene look well thought out, which famously takes place so long into the book and is again another one of those so telegraphed scenes that just isn't resolved for so long. And it's just... Anyways, she doesn't even technically learn that Daniel's a fallen angel in this book, even though the book is called Fallen. Like, somebody says, we're all fallen angels, and she doesn't realize that that means Daniel is also a fallen angel. Before this, what we have for supernatural elements is these constant dark shadows that seem to haunt Luce and appear before disasters, and then there's the fact that she has, like, no memory of this horrible cabin fire that burned her old kind of boyfriend to death. However, we also learn from the get-go that Luce has been in therapy most of her life for having these visions, and been on antipsychotics. We know, and Luce kind of feels that the shadows are real, but this also easily could be the tale of a girl with, like, some psychosis who rejects medication. Like, I think that when she was on medication, they don't make the shadows disappear, but if you consider this as a story without supernatural elements, which it is for most of the book, then you kind of have this story, like, about a girl with mental health issues that have been undiagnosed or misdiagnosed that cause her serious illness and paranoia, but then she refuses to seek any help and is rewarded for that. Like, I'm always really touchy about books with anti-medication themes because it's actually way more common in young adult than you might realize. I've read so many books that have nothing to do with mental health in the slightest that will still have, like, this anti-medication idea to them. Like, the book doesn't do much with mental health or exploring Luce's sort of I'm not crazy thing, but there's still this idea at the heart of it that if you have violent hallucinations, they're probably real. Like, obviously we all suspend our disbelief and we all understand that these spooky shadows are definitely, like, real supernatural stuff because we're reading a book, it's a work of fiction. But definitely the book like throws in some terms like, for example, a lot of the other kids at the school for troubled people are also on medication, and the book will call them like crazies, and they're the people to avoid. So there's a distinction drawn between the people who have mental illnesses that need to be medicated, and then Luce, who doesn't have a mental illness and doesn't need to be medicated, who still, you know, to the world at large, she does need to be medicated, but she is our cool protagonist, so she doesn't actually need it, if that makes sense. Like, the movie, which I recall pretty well, like, there's this line...
Even if it means being locked up, I'd rather be me than pretend to be something I'm not just to fit in.
Even if it means being locked up, I'd rather be me than pretend to be something I'm not just to fit in. And she says that, but it's a scene specifically where Luce is refusing to be medicated by the school doctor for having all of these, like, shadowy visions. And this is shown sort of as, like, a powerful statement. I mean, reading it out of context, it sounds like I'm choosing to be me rather than anything else. But it's about medication. And it really just sends this troubling message about how, like, meds make you pretend or exist to make you normal and fit in. And, like, that's from the movie, not the book, but it's still just sort of shared between both, which is the idea that medication nullifies you from the real world. And if you avoid medication, then you're more raw and real and true, and it just shows up a lot in young adult literature, and it's one of those extremely harmful ideas. For example, another myth about antidepressants in this case, though with her it's more like antipsychotics, but antidepressants have this myth that when you take them you'll lose creativity, and that is one of the most harmful things. So I went on antidepressants for the first time, like, at this point, like 6 years ago, and I remember one of my biggest fears about starting antidepressants, which I really, really needed, was that I was a creative person, and I was very afraid that I was going to lose part of myself or lose access to something because of that, because it was just sort of a message that had been told to me, not necessarily somebody saying this is true, but just learned through the media of the world where medication is portrayed as this thing that you should always avoid. If you're prescribed medication, you should be taking it. Like, there's cases where it might not be the right medication for you. You should always talk to your doctor as much as you can, try different things. But, you know, often it takes a couple tries to find a right medication. But medication is just really important in the treatment of physical ailments and mental ones. Mental illness is, like, not raw or deep or dark or, you know, cool emo. It just sucks, and it involves a lot of misery and suffering. Meds do not make you happy and boring. They might make you happy, but they're not forcing it upon you. It's not a happy pill. It is something that is fixing something in your brain to work a bit better so you can just live a nicer life. And you should definitely always take your medications. This has become a slight off-topic ramble to the actual book Fallen, but I thought I would like to say it. It is one of those things that just greatly annoys me. I'm on a lot of medication, and I have been for years, and it's only very, very good, and I'm only excited to be on it. This is a young adult book from that exact era where everything was a love triangle. I haven't actually read as much modern YA as I probably should, so I don't really know how love triangles are handled. I feel like these days you still have multiple love interests, but they're never quite as direct as a triangle, where in a love triangle, usually the two love interests are in very close proximity to each other, and usually aren't bitter enemies in some way, but both fighting over the love of the hero. Slightly, it's kind of hard to generalize something as broad as just a love triangle, but definitely at this time of books, everything was about the love triangle, and I want to talk about the love triangle in this book and this book series. So, it's one of the worst ones I've read, though they're all pretty bad. A love triangle isn't necessarily a bad thing, though. Like, a love triangle can be fun, like a character having multiple love interests who are interesting people, and the ideal of it is that they offer different paths of development for the main character. So basically they represent different viewpoints in some way that then the character, by choosing this person, is also choosing a path in life or a certain philosophy or idea. A good example of that is Hunger Games, for example, where the two love interests, it's been ages, but like Peeta represents a lot more of a kinder, softer approach, and then Gale is the much more, direct violent action thing. So it's not just their personalities that Katniss has to contend with. By choosing a specific person, she's making much more of a statement of how she wants to be involved in the revolution in the world. And, you can say whether or not that was well done, but that's an example of, like, a better take of how a love triangle can be used in a narrative way. But in this era, love triangles just all suck, and I think that the answer to that is because they're always very boring. Like, Luce, like many paranormal romance heroes, is just passive and just lacks personality. She's emotional about some things, but not others, and doesn't really express herself in any way. There's not really a logic to her choices beyond just she's existing in the moment. She doesn't have a bigger opinion. I mean, Cam is the nice bad boy, and Daniel is the afraid to love good boy, but then Luce is in the center, and she is nothing more than just the girl they both love. And Luce's lack of a personality is a pain for her, but it actually matters more to, like, Cam and Daniel, because it ruins their character when you can't imagine why they love her. Like, Luce offers nothing. Like, she's smart, apparently, but she has no personality or wit. She doesn't do much. She doesn't think much. She just sort of exists, and then Cam will make broad statements about what she wants and what's good for her. Cam just immediately adores her. Daniel, too, is just deeply in love with her, and I think that comes down to the reincarnation thing, which is one of those tropes that is both interesting to me, but also troubling, and we're gonna go a lot more onto just reincarnation and the ethics of it, because that is what the series really is about. So, both of our love triangle halves have known Luce a lot over the centuries, though it's said that she's, like, a bit different every time. But it's the same soul, and it's the same person overall. And if she's still roughly the same, then it's pretty wild to imagine that, like, Daniel sacrifices place in heaven as an angel for her, And it's hard to imagine Cam having this immortal feud over her. Like, her? Like, who is she? But then when it comes to the reincarnation thing, you start to realize that maybe somewhere along the line, not in this book, they have had genuine relationships that have inspired this love for Luce. That Luce doesn't know, doesn't feel, and has no ability to partake in. Like, at a certain point, Luce has become a mythic figure for both of them. Every 17 years, Daniel will run into her. Cam, who is always following around, will run into her. And they will know countless generations of her. They will know her in some way, and she becomes this reincarnated object that continuously will die as they compete for her affection until the bitter end. And then when she's dead, you have 17 years to just sort of think about her, think about what could have been, think about your rivalry, and then it just begins again. And it just becomes such a horrible thing. Like, there's this conceit in the book, like Daniel says, Luce always falls in love with him, and he always falls in love with her, which implies he really does see this new Luce as somebody he isn't immediately in love with, but comes to love. But there's still that weight of just every 17 years, he finds her, she finds him, and they fall in love. But she's a different person every time, and he's not. We hear that this Luce has been alive for 17 years and 52 days, very specific. And that is her longest life ever. What is her shortest life? That is the question one would ask. She's born every 17 years. Does she always live to be at least 17, or is it 17 even if she dies at, like, age 15? Does she then reincarnate, waiting for 2-year pause? And also, we gotta then touch on the idea of the immortals who keep falling for underage girls and go to high school. It's not actually ever explained in the series why a bunch of fallen angels are chilling at a reform high school before Luce even gets there. Her roommate and most of her friends in this one are, like, grown up. I mean, they're grown up, they're angels. They are fallen angels who have been alive for hundreds of years. And before Luce arrives at the school, they are all just chilling out, pretending to be high schoolers for an unclear amount of time without, in theory, knowing Luce was going to arrive there. It's weird, right? Like... So that was a very kind of rambling and weird little one. That's because book 1 is just so strange. Let's just move on to book 2 then, and just get down into it. Book 2 is called Torment, the second book of the series, and it is surprisingly decent, is how I would describe it, which is really weird to say. Like, it's decent. I legit gave it a 3-star rating when I first read it, where 3 stars is pretty high for me, and it's always difficult to define what 3 stars is. But no, book 2 of Fallen is weirdly okay, which is such a radical change from book 2, which I just absolutely hated. And, yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure initially when I picked up book 2 I'd read the rest of the Quartet. I was just sort of curious, how could the series continue at this point? And reading it made me want to finish it. Very puzzling. So, the book basically takes the very few good elements of the first book, which were like some friendships and just supernatural angel demon stuff in general, and then it added a couple things really up my alley. For one, it takes place at this small school for Nephilim, who have like really weak magical powers but still get weird lessons on biblical history and controlling shadows, all in participation for like the coming end of days. To avoid favoritism, the school is taught from a neutral point of view, where Nephilim who come from either side of the whole God-Lucifer debate all go to the same school together, and the two teachers are this awesome married couple of like an angel and a demon who nevertheless still plan to fight to death in the end of days, which is such a fun concept, like this angel demon school. I mean, that's so fun. It's almost like it's exactly the premise for a book that I wrote. Because I legitimately wrote a book, duology called Good Angel, Bad End, which legitimately takes place at a school where angels and demons study together and includes the headmasters who are just BFFs of an angel and a demon. It was exactly something that I've written because I dig the concept so much. So that, maybe that was a whole star right there. But also, kind of making the book more decent is that there's this introspection from Luce, who starts to think about her relationship with Daniel and all of the unfortunate implications that just go with that. Especially that since she's reborn and dies every 17 years, she has a series of relatives and parents who are left grieving her. Daniel is essentially the world's most specialized serial killer, and over the book she comes to like resent and grow angry at this bad power structure they have, which is incredible and all I want when it comes to a reincarnation story like this. So, plot-wise, at the end of the last book, Daniel just sort of whisked Luce away and left her to deal with it. In this, she's set up at this lovely modern boarding school in California that caters to Nephilim, those with angelic blood. Since angelic blood can come from angels or demons, which are kind of both fallen angels, but whatever, the school aims to be a place that simply trains Nephilim to use their powers in the coming apocalypse and choose whatever side they want. Nephilims have various powers. Luce's new classmates can levitate, travel through shadows, speak 18 languages, create perfect illusions, and like more. There's this pretty funny scene early on where she has to do an icebreaker challenge on her first day of school, and the student body has all of these ridiculous powers where it's one of those like bingo cards of like, find somebody who can do this, and then it's all of these absolutely like silly weird things. None of them are really OP. It's just like charming to see these kind of magical but mostly normal teens. Again, it would be so fun as like a completely different series. And as mentioned, the people who run the school are an angel and demon who are deeply in love but also bitter enemies. And I just love the gray area they represent. They do things like show a time portal to Sodom and Gomorrah burning, and then they teach lessons against messing with all of these shadow things. Luce basically feels slightly out of place as a mortal without any power. She can summon the big shadow spirits, it turns out, but that is forbidden, and otherwise feels out of place. Still, she comes to be like good friends of several Nephilim. Specifically, the characters called Shelby and Miles. Meanwhile, Daniel and Cam are hunting down and killing countless outcasts, which are basically angels that were very decisive during the Heaven War, so now they're blind and rejected by both heaven and hell for being really indecisive. I don't know. They want Luce for themselves, so Luce has to stay on campus all day, where she'll be protected by the headmasters. Daniel says that he's also not meant to see her. There's this thing where he and the demon Cam have like an 18-day truce of not seeing Luce and teaming up to like kill outcasts. But despite this, Daniel keeps sneaking over to the campus to visit. And while there, Luce is struck by her deep love for him. Like, they dance on the ocean and they go for high flies in the sky, but they keep getting into arguments too. Like, he's keeping a ton of secrets from her, and he still won't tell her anything. Luce, at this point, frustrated, learns that announcers, the shadow things are called announcers, I should probably say that, big shadow clouds, all of these announcer spirits contain a moment in time inside of them, and she starts to learn how to summon them and then open them to view time itself and like moments in time caught inside of them. And by doing that, she's able to learn more about her own past lives, including tracking down former family members, such as her parents from a past life, and her once older sister. Luce also falls into danger several times for like breaking rules, such as, shadow stepping through space using the announcers or leaving campus, but mostly she's just increasingly annoyed of Daniel for not telling her a thing. He hasn't even said why she has to stay there, and he's getting more and more controlling. And eventually, it all boils down to this Thanksgiving dinner at Luce's house, where Daniel and Cam show up uninvited. When an army of outcasts attack those weird blind angels, Luce barely makes it through alive, and realizing again how many lies and mysteries Daniel has been telling her, she steps through an announcer into one of her past lives, determined to learn the truth. And from that plot summary, you can probably maybe tell that this is just way more interesting in every way than Fallen. There's so many actually good ideas here and just cool notions, from the school itself to these weird lingering shadows that have time portals in them, to one of my favorite themes, Daniel himself. I didn't really mind Daniel last book. He was extremely basic and very cold when he was trying to stay away from Luce, but he didn't end up being horrible. But then in this book, he's suddenly very controlling, he's difficult, he's rude, he's just so unpleasant, and like, you just cannot forgive him from it. The conceit of this book is that Luce and Daniel are deep soulmates with a long history of love, but Luce realizes she doesn't really know anything about Daniel. He gets kind of upset when she dyes her hair, and when she says it's her hair and choice, he says, "That's not fair. I don't want you to be anyone other than who you are." He expresses a ton of just very controlling behaviors, like ordering her to stay on campus but refusing to tell her why. He just becomes a very abusive boyfriend. And this book does such a good job at calling Daniel out for all his nonsense. Like, my own hot takes here almost don't matter because I can just read from the book and it's correct. Beyond that big one with the hair, like, it's just ridiculous. I mean, Luce keeps forgiving him too, and obviously, I can tell you, end of the series, their end game. But here is Luce talking about Daniel and making just so many good points. Daniel had ruined that couple's life, killed their daughter, all because he'd been some hotshot angel who saw something he wanted and went after it. And at this point, Luce says, "I am suffering, me and everyone who loves me, for your curse, for all time, because of you. I want you to take back whatever it was you did to get me into this, and I just want to live and die a normal life and break up with normal people over normal things like toasters, not the supernatural secrets of a universe that you don't even trust me with." Like, tell him, Luce, that is so correct. Like, I am not really a soulmates kind of person, but this book showed a very real glimpse of an interesting narrative that I actually want to write, I want to see. It's a girl who keeps being reincarnated because an immortal won't let her die. It's this strange, hellish idea. She even questions something that, like, I called out, like, last book. I was saying, why is Daniel so into her? How did he get this in love with her, considering she's not interesting or special and she keeps dying at 17? And here she is discussing it with one of her friends. This is her speaking first. "He chose me over some big role in heaven, over some elevated position. That's pretty major, don't you think? There has to be more to it than him just thinking I was cute." But you don't know what it was? I've asked, but he's never told me what happened. When I brought it up, it was almost like Daniel couldn't remember. And that's crazy, because it means we're just going through the motions, based on thousands of years of some fairy tale neither of us can even back up. So basically, there's some really good meta thought on the actual horror of the scenario, how Luce is completely powerless in it. She loves Daniel on instinct, but she can hardly be with him, and knows nothing of his past, or even his presence, while he knows everything about her. She starts to question this idea of their love story, and if she wouldn't be happier if she just met a nice mortal boy, and didn't die at the age of 17 yet again. I really like this development, and it shows Luce in more of a way as like an active character. She has a unique storyline and an arc of her own. I could get with her, like, I could understand her feelings of frustration and isolation. The story takes on a darker tone if you think that whenever she's with Daniel, she's always immediately overwhelmed with love and light, almost like he has a magical sway over his emotions. He arrives on campus and she sees him, and suddenly she's filled with this blissful love out of nowhere, and then it starts to fall apart when they bicker. When he's gone, she starts to question everything, but the moment he returns, she's just full of this love, and it becomes really, really creepy. Though the one issue with all of this good stuff is that she does keep turning back to loving him. Even when she's angry or questioning, she still thinks of him as her one true love, when really it'd be nice to see her take a break from Daniel entirely. Like, the idea of her just winding up with some other guy is a good one. That'd be revolutionary in YA. I mean, it'd have to be a whole new book rather than book 2 where she just completely changes everything, but there's just so much potential here in the story that, well, spoiler alert for the rest of it, isn't going to be resolved in the way that I so wanted it to. One more thing before I move on to book 3, just a couple stray notes and extra things just from this book. There's this very strange thing I need to point out where Luce's, like, Nephilim friend implies that she had a relationship with Daniel before, but it was ages ago. In the epilogue, Daniel mentions it was just a crush on Shelby's part and unfulfilled, and also years ago, but even then, Shelby is 17 in this book, and it's a weird thing for everybody to keep bringing up. Like, Shelby was claiming that she hooked up with, or even just kissed Daniel when she was 15 or younger, and that is certifiably creepy. But anyways, Luce's friends feel better this time around too. That also adds to the book. Like, without knowing it, there was always something really weird in the first book about how everyone around Luce was an angel, and thus from the beginning of time. She has a wacky goth roommate friend. She's completely old. She's old as balls. There's this one girl that she calls all of book 1, she calls her like a fembot. She's also the oldest, beings in the universe. It was this strange power dynamic. Them being in school is just never explained. But then in this book, Luce's friends are on her level and also not hiding deep secrets. They're just Nephilim, actually her age, and that's nice. Her old friends show up again, but they're treated more as celebrities. Like, angel books, like, the angel textbooks they have all the names of the fallen, so all of her Nephilim friends recognize her old school friends from history and are a little in awe. When they show up, they're treated more as like these cool older siblings that Luce is friends with, rather than being her peers, because they were never her peers. The ideas of like angels being celebs to Nephilim is really fun too. Similarly, everybody in the angel-related world knows Luce, which is super funny. They all know her story as the girl who keeps exploding. Like, one character says that her mother told her about Luce's story as like a fairy tale ages ago, and that is just delightful world building of like, oh, when I was a kid, my mom told you the story about how you keep exploding, and then the main character is just sitting there like, so everybody knows about it but me. That's great. So anyways, the book here, Torment, is surprisingly not tormenting. Like, it is quite good and enjoyable and kind of fun. The romance isn't good, there's this jealousy plot that's boring, and it's just such a shame that there is this absolute peak in the series of Torment, and now we're about to go downhill. So book 3 is called Passion, and it's really unclear why this book exists in the first place. The Fallen series is a quartet, which is slightly unusual for the paranormal trilogy boom. Typically, these books from the 2010s had this very formulaic pattern where in book 1 they meet and fall in love and learn the supernatural elements. In book 2, not much happens, and that's usually the worst book. And then book 3, there's some apocalyptic showdown. Trilogies were very, very big in the young adult book space, and paranormal romance had a lot of them. Obviously, Twilight, which is the father of this whole boom and genre, had 4 books. So a number of books wound up being 4. Hush Hush is also 4, Fallen is 4, but most of them were trilogies. And filling 4 books when they could barely fill 3 is not usually the best idea. And it's quite strange how Fallen fits in the middle of that. Because every book of Fallen is somehow a completely different kind of subgenre. Book 1 is this incredibly boring school romance. Book 2 is this adventure magical school story. Book 3 is time travel, believe it or not. And then book 4 is a fetch quest. They're all slightly different, which keeps it fresh. But narrative-wise, book 3 does not need to exist. I mean, this is a book about time travel, and it's exclusively about time travel. I can't fault what's going on the baseline of Passion. I've read so much worse books. The writing's fine, the settings are diverse, and there's some research, clearly. There was nothing that made me stop and go, that's ridiculous. There's some degree of character and world building going on. But from a story arc point of view, this is 400 pages of just time travel and nothing else. It could have existed as 1 to 2 chapters and covered absolutely everything else. At the end of last book, to go way back to that, Luce jumped into one of those time travel shadow things. They're called announcers. They're big spooky shadows. They have basically a window into the past inside of them. She jumped in there to try and learn about her past lives and what secrets Daniel is obviously hiding from her. The book is, beyond the very last chapter, her jumping from time to time and witnessing her and Daniel in each time. She travels backwards in time, which is roughly World War II, World War I, Prussia, Victorian England, a Polynesian island, Tibet, Versailles, Shakespearean England, the Mayan Empire, Shang Dynasty China, ancient Egypt, ancient Jerusalem, and then heaven at the very end. So basically each chapter is her in a different place. She doesn't stick around very long for any of them, and alternatively between all of her just magic world adventures, we get Daniel trying to catch up with her. In each of Luce's past lives, she sees how she was someone else entirely, such as she isn't always a dark-haired white girl. Her ethnicity obviously changes to match where she is, and Daniel also similarly has changed his appearance to blend in with whatever local culture he's at. Luce is also joined by a spirit that she meets while traveling, which she doesn't really question, who takes the shape of a small, ugly gargoyle while he travels with her. His name is Bill, and he helps guide her using her powers to travel, and teaches her how she can join her soul to her past life soul to sort of gain access to the memories and try to understand who she is in Daniel's relationship. Which, again, sort of sounds like this is a premise of a completely different book series, and that is absolutely how all of Fallen feels. So, yeah, I mean, all of these past Luces are dead because they fell in love with Daniel and thus exploded in some way. Part of her journey of the whole book is trying to figure out what triggers this death, since it isn't always kissing or touching or saying one word. We eventually learn it goes back to the curse itself, that whenever she comes close to remembering her past, which we will cover in a second, her true past, she dies. Also, Daniel is the one who allowed for our Luce to keep living now. So right now, if you'll recall, this is weird time travel bullshit. Luce kisses Daniel and doesn't explode, and isn't going to explode for the rest of the book series, despite the fact she'll learn the truth of her past. And the truth of her past is what makes her explode in the first place. And in this book series, Daniel travels in time and meets his former self, and he gets his former self to beg God to give Luce more of a chance, because remember, she wasn't baptized in this life. which I am also, when I say this out loud, right now I'm remembering the fact that it's baptism that matters, which sort of is mysterious when you consider the fact that she was around before baptism was probably a thing, and in cultures where baptism isn't a thing, so unclear how she got baptized those lives. Anyways, there's some time travel bullshit, whatever the heck, whatever. At the very end, we learn that Bill, the little gargoyle spirit, is literally just Satan in disguise. He tries to trick Luce into killing her soul so that he can finally have Daniel join his side in the, God-devil conflict and tip the balance of the eternal war in his favor. Satan is this ugly giant demon man, and he's just very generic. And at the end of the book, he makes an announcer that, takes all of the falling angels to the land in hell, and he'll have them all on his side using some time travel bullshit, which will basically rewrite all of history out of existence. However, this fall in the past will take our heroes 9 days, so our heroes have... I know that I'm explaining this poorly, but it's just so weird because time travel sucks. Lucifer goes back in time, and he makes a giant time travel portal that will, when all of the angels first fell from heaven, way back when, he makes a portal at the bottom of where they're going to fall, and that bottom portal will lead straight to hell, presumably in the present, which means that the angels will have never made it to Earth, rewriting all of human history, and for some reason, the act of them falling like that will take 9 days, even though it's kind of in the past at the beginning of time. They have 9 present-day days to stop Satan, is the setup for the next book. I hate time travel. Time travel is just very annoying. I've never found it cool or interesting, and it usually just gives me a headache. And this book's time travel base is that any action our time travels do has already happened, as the moment they do something, like interfere with the past, it immediately rewrites the present they are from, and thus would immediately change them, whether or not they know that they have been changed. So everything that has happened has happened. I'm not really big on this take because it basically robs everyone of their free will. Everything that they've done, they have, done. So whatever happens in the past can have no consequences. Luce is warned against messing with things, but she notes if she really screws up, she'd just cease to exist. So that would never happen, and does never happen. So since everything in the past has happened, Luce in the future heading to the past has already happened, and no change she can change can actually change everything. And her goal isn't even to change things, but to observe things. I hate time travel. And yeah, it just gets more migraine-like when you consider that Daniel and the other angels are behind Luce, following her through time. However, the moment she arrives somewhere in the past, she has been in the past, and Daniel and the angels should have memories of seeing her in the past. She starts at World War II, and he does too, but even though for, present Luce, it is the future when she heads to Victorian England, it is still overall the past, meaning the moment that Luce steps to the announcer to begin her time quest, Daniel should have immediate memories of all of the, for him, future events that happened in the past. I hate time travel, and I just really dislike all of the time travel in this book. And, no. Let's talk about Daniel in book 3. So, Luce makes some great progress last book into realizing Daniel was treating her poorly, and that their relationship was kind of creepy. A good book might have explored this further, how Daniel is so obsessed with his, one true soulmate that he can't stop himself approaching her, and then stop himself from essentially killing her over and over again. And this book does a lot of showing his side, which I guess adds some depth to the man, but not really. Whenever Luce dies, he will lay down in complete misery and just be sad. He forces himself to sleep or endure horrible jail or just sometimes throws himself off a mountain to break all his bones as self-punishment. And this shows some devotion. As to the fact that Luce realizes Daniel always works for Luce's love rather than take advantage of how her soul is always drawn to his. He never just sort of walks in and is like, she's just going to be naturally into me, I'm going to take advantage of that. He always tries to romance her whenever he does it, or avoid it. But it's still weird when you think about it. He loves her so much, I guess, that it's agony not to be with her. Then he always kills her, and then he puts himself in more agony as he waits to meet her again. Daniel is just sort of this sadomasochistic character. It's actually kind of horrifying. And as always, I'm of the mind that he should let her go. If you love her, let her go, that sort of thing. Like, you love her and you're soulmates, but you are literally cursed to make her explode. If you love her, just watch her from afar, like a stalker or whatever, be a spirit and hang out, but don't hang out with her. You have the knowledge to prevent her from dying, yet you always go back and let it happen. Yes, Daniel feels bad when it happens to Luce, but he doesn't seem to care about her tragedy-struck family, only his own misery. Like, his only reward for himself is the pain and he wallowing alone. He only cares about his own pain. He's this extreme narcissist who only places himself and his relationship with Luce above everything else, including over Luce. If he loved her, wouldn't he want her to be happy without him? To be with her family who love her? To grow old to meet someone else? But Daniel doesn't love Luce. He loves his relationship with Luce. He has to be with her. She can't simply exist as she is and be happy. And he cannot love her in that way. He can only love her if he is physically in her life up until the point she dies, which she always does. It is a supremely horrifying situation that is absolute fodder for some very good writing of somebody write this book, I'll write this book, we'll all work, we'll all independently write books about exactly this because it is just screaming with potential. Okay. Some last notes for this section on book 3. Oh boy, just a couple little notes. We do learn one of the youngest times Daniel and Luce had a relationship. Oh no, in World War I, he met her when she was 13. He says he didn't reciprocate until she was older, but we legitimately see his POV. He still fawns over her when he sees this past 13-year-old self, including calling her, and I swear to God this is horrible, young and lovely, innocent and saucy in the same breath. That's some of the creepiest thing I've ever seen in a book. And this is just our legitimate love interest fawning over a 13-year-old version of his love interest. Another point is Cam. Cam is such a non-character for what he was in book 1, as the other half of the love triangle. He returns in book 3, he's basically not in book 2, he's not really that much in book 3, and it's one of the oddest choices I've seen in a book like this, where Cam, who's set up as the bad boy love triangle part, is no longer a love triangle part in the slightest. Cam just sort of stops mattering to the book. He's not that important in the 4th book, he's not very important in the other ones. He's in the 1st book as the obvious love interest, and then he's just sort of left behind for unclear reasons. We do get to see why Cam became an evil angel. So, literally, he's in love with a girl named Lilith in ancient Jerusalem. She's descended from, the one in Eden. And he and Lilith plan to get married, and Daniel is even going to officiate their marriage. But fallen angels can't step into a church without the place catching fire. So Cam insists with Lilith, let's get married somewhere else, outside. And Lilith gets pissed and calls off the wedding. And then Daniel and Cam have a fight. And then Cam flies off to join Satan. That is it. That is Cam's full backstory on why he is evil and a bad boy. It's because his girlfriend that he really liked wouldn't get married outside. It's one of the silliest little things for this character who no longer matters. And, last thing. So this is kind of a, spoiler for book 4, but I just want to talk about it now while I'm here, whatever. This is a freelance review. We're going wild out here, aren't we? So, Luce and Lucifer, beautiful, used to be in love. This is a spoiler because it turns out that Luce is actually an angel. She's not a human soul that keeps getting reincarnated. She's an angel soul that keeps getting reincarnated. And as part of that backstory, Luce was in love with Lucifer back in heaven. That's a pretty important plot point. And considering that, Lucifer as Bill, the weird gargoyle, and just in general, doesn't act at all like you would expect from that. You would have thought that, in his go-to, mislead her and try and get his evil plans done, he'd try to seduce her a bit, especially since he's kind of still in love with her. The fact that he's just this weird gargoyle making dirty jokes is so strange. You can imagine a version of this where Bill is a guide from the void, but he takes the shape of a hot dude. And in a moment of comfort, they like make out. And then if they had more of an attachment, the reveal that he's evil and Satan would be so much more dramatic. Luce barely liked Bill. He was this annoying little gargoyle guy. And in a much better version of the story, or at least a much better for, you know, the young adult crowd, he would have been a really hot guy. And it would be like the contrast to Daniel, where they make out or whatever, and then it's like, ooh, I'm actually the devil, but you know, we were soulmates before you and Daniel were soulmates. And then that would add so much more drama, especially since we just sort of shafted Cam. So, book 4. And also the lights are on now. So, book 4 is called Rapture. And I haven't really been going into my personal ratings for these books, but they're okay. I wouldn't suggest anybody reading them, but Rapture is in another life. Rapture would have been an okay standalone novel or book 1 of a completely different series. I mean, Rapture kind of has a lot of things going for it. It has lovely descriptions, there's vivid images of international locations, interesting angel lore, there's some neat magical ideas, there's a few raised and slightly discussed deeper themes. The problem with all of those kind of positives is that this is book 4 in a quartet in the most uneven series of all time. The Fallen Quartet is just one of the most diverse book series I've ever seen, where every single one is just a different genre, story type. It's like the author was just experimenting and wanted to use just the same very bland characters in a different way each time. So I legitimately enjoyed aspects of book 4, but it was always hampered down by the fact that it was the last book, and thus it needed to provide a conclusion and a tie-in to the ones before it, and also it needed to be book 4 of a series where you have so much lead-in that even if it was like an amazing book somehow, it would never be worth reading because you'd have to read 3 400-page tomes to get there. Like, there's this treasure hunt for ancient angelic relics to solve a mystery about the fall. It's kind of a fun idea, and it easily could have been a plot for something else. I mean, as it is, it almost sounds like a Dan Brown novel. So, let's see. Last book was pure time travel. Luce and Daniel are now together in the present. Satan has used an announcer to portal all of the fallen angels from the past straight to hell, which would rewrite all of human history and erase everything. However, the fall takes 9 days, he can't speed that up, giving our heroes a small window to save the world. To do that, they first need to find out where the angels fell to Earth. Despite them all being fallen angels, besides the mortal, apparently human Luce, none of them remember because of the fall was just so shocking. It took 9 days, but they didn't really memorize where they were falling, okay? So to find out, they will have to discover 3 ancient artifacts which contain the key to finding out about the fall, and then unite them all at Mount Sinai. So, it really is a fetch treasure quest. It is just completely different. The team all splits up, Daniel and Luce, and then we have a bunch of the other angels. There's legitimately 7 other side characters, but I've been mostly skipping them. They do not matter. Each heads to a place Daniel, thinks that the relics were long ago, and we just sort of get a montage of having a lot of fun trying to solve clues. There's a book that Daniel wrote hundreds of years ago that they're trying to use. It's all quite improbable, but they all find all these artifacts in the way. Causing issues, being our generic bad guys, are those outcasts who are fallens who were so indecisive that they were punished by being made blind and albino, as well as the Scale, who are these new villains who are lower ranked angels who have self-appointed themselves heaven police. Then there's also the Elders, who are first mentioned in book 1, but then have not appeared or done anything else. And I don't know what the Elders were because they just sort of are mentioned, they exist, whatever the heck. So there's a lot of these bad guys, there's a lot of running around, fetching quests, looking for things. Honestly, a lot of it doesn't really matter in the end. Luce and Daniel find the first relic, but they're told trouble has fallen on the team seeking the second and the third, and so they have to then travel to those locations to get the items themselves. One of the items ends up being an old woman, a trans-eternal, who was a quasi-immortal human who could not die of old age because her ancient ancestor was the biblical guy who invented prayer. Cool. Some of the angels sacrifice themselves so that Luce can, like, live longer, and the remaining guys all, like, follow this trans-eternal woman to the correct spot to get, like, the final fall site. The ritual to find the fall site includes excavating an ancient temple, putting the relics, like, in this correct place, and then Luce has to murder this immortal woman. She has to sacrifice this immortal woman in this blood ritual, and eventually, like, does it, as the blood is the key to reveal where Troy is, which was the final falling place. And then this immortal woman gives Luce a final gift of self-knowledge, and Luce begins to feel weird and have visions. As they travel to the fall site to prepare to stop Lucifer, Luce has flashes of her earliest life and her true life. She was an angel named Lucinda. Yeah, her parents in this life conveniently did call her a name very close to her angel name because she wasn't named Luce in, like, all of her lives, because that would be ridiculous. As Lucinda, she was the third highest of all the angels. God made the universe, and it was awesome, but then he disappeared for a while to make humanity, and the angels felt abandoned, and some were really distrusting. While God was missing, Lucinda and Lucifer invented love, specifically a love that isn't from God, because love exists from God, but they invented love between two people where God isn't involved. She deeply loved Lucifer and he loved her, but he began to press her to rebel and openly declaring to others that their love was powerful and true, and that their love was, you know, more than God's love in that way. It's all about love wars here. Lucinda grew unhappy by his controlling behavior, including semi-brainwashing her with, like, a love hymn that he writes. But then Lucinda met Daniel and fell in love with how nice Daniel was compared to Lucifer. So you're still kind of doing the illegal love thing, but this guy's really nice. He's different. Lucifer, pissed off, threw together his rebellion, and angry at Lucinda for picking Daniel over him, and cheating on him, really, he cursed her. God also cursed her for not picking a side in the heaven-hell split. So this is why Luce keeps being reborn and exploding whenever she remembers being an angel. Luce, now fully aware of her past, gets her wings back. She flies into the announcer time portal to confront Lucifer alone. She basically tells him to get over the fact that she doesn't love him, and that resetting time will not make her love him. He deflects and is kind of weird, but eventually shows, like, a small sign of giving up, lamenting that she deserves better. And just as they're sort of making progress in this climax, God shows up. Yeah, like God just shows up, and God yells, "Enough!" and everything stops. And then God takes them all to heaven, Lucifer included, where God appears in a humanoid form. As a woman, ooh. So God declares that since Luce has remembered and broken her curse, it's time to ask if she'll finally pick a side in the heaven-hell split. She chooses Daniel yet again, and so God gives up on her and decides her and Daniel should just be reborn as mortal humans with no soulmate link and then die as mortals with no input from heaven or hell. And they agreed to that. I don't know why God didn't do this earlier. In the epilogue, Luce and Daniel meet as humans 17 years later, just being completely normal people, though they still feel they've met before, and the angels all watch from the wings. Yeah, that's the plot. It's interesting. I think the largest issue of this plot, and I don't know how clear it was on my summary, is that it isn't actually a conclusion. It's not really a conclusion to anything but Luce and Daniel, certainly, and even then it represents very little change. In a way, this ending is essentially as if Luce died in book 1 and we saw a chapter of the next Luce. She has no memory, and though as readers we know the same now applies to Daniel, he might as well be doing his usual I don't know her kind of stunt. Essentially, everything in the book has been rendered moot by this ending. We've lost everything. I mean, Luce and Daniel, though now they'll eventually die and are strangers, are going to fall in love again. Lucifer has not been stopped or redeemed or changed particularly, it's unclear, and heaven and hell are still in this perfect balance. The angel police who were introduced in this book are still super corrupt. The only permanent changes are the deaths of 2 of the angel friends, and the fact that, like, 4 of the outcast angels or whatever got redeemed, but very, very little changes. Like, the series wasn't really heavy with plot threads, but the more that you look back on the lives of the background characters, the more you realize it's just unresolved. We have a character who has a scar that was always mysterious, and that's never explained. Cam is entirely left to an unknown fate in the epilogue. He barely matters. I mean, there's one vaguely plot thread where another angel, might switch sides, but we're never going to get a conclusion on that. We don't really know why the demons, the fallen angel demons, are still loving Lucifer, even though they literally just stopped Lucifer. We don't know if the apocalypse is ever going to happen. Like, how is this resolved? It isn't. And I think the most telling aspect of books like this is the mystery of the main character's human friends and parents. Ultimately, a paranormal romance will end with the main character and her love having a life together, often in eternal or immortal sense, or else magic and secret. In this, Luce's parents think she's still at boarding school, with a human ally providing a cover story. She left at Thanksgiving and said to her parents and her best friend, like her human best friend, like, hey, I'm going back to school. 9 days later, at the climax, she spares no thought for them as she agrees to be reborn by, like, God rebirths her, as it were. And what happens to her family and her friends? She spares no thought to them and will never know. There's always such a tragedy behind every young adult story like this when you start to think about the poor mundane people. God didn't go back in time and erase human history since Luce has been born into another family. The epilogue is 17 years into the future. After book 2 took time to explore the fact that Luce's death left a grieving family behind, it's ironic for the last book to leave out how she yet again has done that to somebody. Or maybe forgotten? I don't know. Like, what did God do in the end? God is portrayed in this book as very apathetic. She sweeps in at the climax, this literal deus ex machina, but she resolves things quickly, carelessly. She doesn't deal with Lucifer. She barely speaks to any of the plot threads at hand. She just basically is like, I give up on you two, you're humans now, and sends them on your way. Luce is probably buried and mourned as if she died in a freak accident. Maybe did she leave a body behind? Her angel friends don't mind. They know that she's now a baby in Texas, but her parents and friends and everyone else will never get closure. It's so strange to have this God show up because it just wraps up the plot and in a particularly unsatisfying way. Lucifer and Luce were having a kind of dumb conversation about their ancient bad breakup, but they were getting somewhere, with Lucifer showing a sign of character growth, or character, and then God shows up and she's kind of like pissed. Like I said, she sloppily fixes things up and the book ends. It takes the wallop out of the climax to have an all-powerful entity just decide the book has gone on long enough and it's time to end. There's no suspense when God shows up, because there can't be, because God is a force which can't be stopped or influenced or changed, and is in charge of reality. The journey against time, the race to stop Lucifer from rewriting history, is so pointless the moment you introduce God as a character. Her willingness to just say enough and wrap things up shows Lucifer never had any threat. He never would have succeeded, Luce or not, because God can just stop him. Because God can do anything. Like, race against time, no, it's not. So why did God wait until last minute? I don't know. Who knows? Lucifer rewriting time so he gets all of the fallen angels in hell and can tip the balance, I mean, that's just pointless because God can just stop it from happening. I mean, honestly, if you're going to intervene on Lucifer's plans to nonchalantly, like, become God or whatever, why don't you just kill him and tip the balance your way? Why don't you rewrite time and copy his plan? Why don't you erase him from space-time, God? Why did you show up, and why did you show up now? Like, okay, like, having the Christian God as a character raises a lot of nasty problems in any piece of work, okay? And I guess I know the point of people must be free to do evil as a test to still choose good, and that applies to the fallen angels, yet for some reason she intervenes here, where clearly she shouldn't intervene on here, or she should have intervened elsewhere and earlier. Yeah, it's just, you can go on forever arguing about this, but it was just one of those things where it's just frustrating, as it were. And, okay, Lucifer. Let's talk about Lucifer too while we're here. I'm really big on the guy. He's a lovely guy. And, you know, my main boy is Archangel Michael. I'm a Archangel Michael stan. You know, he's tragically or maybe luckily absent from the series. But I like Lucifer as a character. I'm interested in books about him or with him. And, you know, I do kind of, I get his point, you know, not to be radical. But I've already covered how he's not a threat the moment you introduce God and time travel into play. But Lucifer is also just really such a non-presence in this plot. He's not around until the climax, doing, like, because he's trapped in a time vortex. So we only really have him as Bill to go off of, who's this unfunny, ugly little gargoyle. He talks like a radio DJ, and Luce spends a lot of time sort of being flustered about him and almost liking him, despite the fact that he's a weird little gargoyle who she's usually annoyed with. Lucifer in book 4 is reduced to just this creepy stalker-like nice guy who is just obsessed with Luce. And any book is way weaker when the villain is just a miserable, ugly guy who's annoyed that he got rejected by a girl. But it's way more embarrassing when the guy in question is Satan, and the breakup happened at the beginning of time. Lucifer and Luce were in love, and then he got super possessive, insisting she change herself for him and projecting what he wanted onto her, like saying she wanted to rebel when she didn't. The rebellion isn't purely because of Luce, it's implied that she more was the excuse he used, but ultimately it's framed that because Lucifer and Luce discovered love, the fall happened. Free will isn't really discussed, like it's just because of a girl. Satan's whole motivations are erased as like a character to only be about his girlfriend and then their really bad breakup. Heaven fell to pieces and evil was invented because one sniveling guy couldn't accept that a girl like the girl he liked somebody else now. It's so hard to be interested in a villain when he's just hanging around the fall in perpetual time limbo so he can cradle his ex-girlfriend's paralyzed body and sing love songs because he thinks resetting time will mean she's picked him at last. It's stupid, it's sad, and it's such a waste of the character. Lucifer, by the way, is hot in this book. He's hot in heaven, super hot. And again, you get the feeling that the series would have been stronger if he was allowed to just be hot and around way more. Like, listen, like, broken-hearted Lucifer plotline isn't great, but it could easily work better if we'd seen Lucifer's more times before this. If as Bill, he was hot. If he was in book 2 teaching Luce dark magic and secrets. If maybe instead of Cam, who did nothing, we just had Lucifer the whole time. That way, we're tying it back to his real identity. And also, it's probably worth noting while I'm here that when I talk about Lucifer's behaviors in this book series, about wanting to control Luce, and it's very annoying they have the same name, but Lucifer's actions in the story about trying to control her, obsessing over her, wanting her and never getting over her, is exactly the same as Daniel, except Daniel, obviously, she chose Daniel, you know, at the beginning of time. There's really not much difference between the two of them from that viewpoint. And at the very end of the series, Lucifer is there in one of the most mysterious bits of a scene. Because in the epilogue, Lucifer is there. God makes a note about him being a little bit changed by everything, but he's not redeemed. However, he is in the new Luce's college laundry room for some reason. He sits there flipping a coin and asking her to call it. He gets it right both times, and he says, you won again. Obviously lamenting that she's going to meet Daniel in a few minutes and they'll fall in love again. Still, this is a very mysterious little scene. Like, was Lucifer also cursed to be mortal now? Like, what is he doing here? Is he just chilling on Earth? Like, one of God's clauses on the reborn thing was that they would have no visits or influence from angels or demons. So Lucifer being there suggests that he no longer counts as either, despite him seeming to know who she is and what's going on, and everything with Daniel. I can easily imagine he's been cursed like Luce until he finally learns humility, which is this interesting premise, but it still breaks God's actual contract in the book. I don't think the author thought this out is the actual truth of it. I think that with the Fallen series, it has this incredible amount of definitely made up as it went along. It's so clear that each book, the author was just sort of considering something new and just going for it. There's so many character threads that are absolutely dropped or changed or completely different. There's a lot of these small side details that make no sense. There's just nothing quite coherent. And even though there's a bunch of these actually interesting ideas going on, none of them are really seized upon in the way that you actually want them to be. I don't really have a set up conclusion for this whole series. This whole video, I feel like it's so scattershot. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to it. I hope that it is enjoyable. As it happens with a lot of these reviews, what happens is that I take my old reviews, because I read these books actually a bit ago at this point, I put them in one document and I just sort of go for it. And I think that you can probably tell that it's a lot less organized than some of my reviews that I've written more recently, like Perfected or Save the Pearls, where it's a series that I'm reading both at once and on purpose combining them in a careful way. This is a lot more slapshot like that. I still hope it's enjoyable because I am giving you the plot of the series, my thoughts, my feelings, and now you're a lot more informed about one of the weirdest series out there. But yeah, I don't actually have a solid conclusion for it. Fallen is, as it is, one of the, gosh, my legs. One of the weirdest little series. I say weird so much, but there's so many of these paranormal romance, angel demon 2012 or something era books out there, and they all are so similar, and Fallen breaks the mold in so many ways that it's intriguing. It's mysterious. It makes me want to write some sort of fan fiction where I just correct a bunch of stuff and also make it into a horror about the frighteningness of reincarnation, which is one of the most unsettling things. I understand people who like soulmates. I do understand soulmates. I understand reincarnation. But it is terrifying to me how there is a supernatural man who follows around this young teen girl until they accidentally fall in love. And if he just would stop hanging out with her, the moment he saw her, if he'd just leave, she would be fine. But she has lived hundreds of lifetimes dying because of him, because he cannot stay away from this teen girl. And that is so interesting. Bad, but also interesting as a concept, and the book knows this and then just completely fails to give us anything. So yeah, Fallen, huh? Wow, what a series. I don't have any more to say. As you can tell, I am not looking at my script anymore, and I'm just going off of it. And when I read for like 2 or 3 hours, or however long it's been of prepping this, I just start to get a little bit rambly and a little bit sickly feeling. But hey, working on some really cool videos. I'm reading one of the weirdest books right now, and when I say weirdest, I mean it's a book about a vaccine that kills God, so that will be really exciting when I'm done with it. In the meantime, hey, cool, good job, thank you for watching.